Good afternoon, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. It's a pleasure to have Geronimo Villanueva here for his first visit.
I've been here before, but never as to give a seminar. So.
All right. And to answer your first question, Geronimo is really his name, but he is named after the Italian saint. So that's that fundamental question resolved. He's from Mendoza, Argentina, and earned a degree, undergraduate degree there, and then a PhD through the Max Planck Institute, for planetary science, which at the time was in Lindau. It's the one which is now in Göttingen. Although you went to University of Freiburg for the day, because your professor had moved there. So a lot of details here. This could go on a long time. He has a very long and exemplary history. He went as an NRC postdoc to Goddard Space Flight Center. He's held a position at Catholic University there. Relate a little bit about his recognition in the field. He recently won the Urey Prize from the Division for Planetary Scientists. It's the Young Scientist Award for significant accomplishments, and in his case, for planetary spectroscopy. He also has an asteroid named after him, and do you know the number?
No. I should.
But again, a mark of recognition in the field. He also holds a position for outreach through the State Department, which is pretty unique, and has funding from Shakira's, what we call it?
Foundation. Yeah, it's a foundation, yeah.
And so he's very active in that area as well. All of this is why he's here as part of sort of a double-header, a two-day visit to visitors. And if I could have Chris Moore talk about what's still to come, that would be great.
So I'd like to thank you guys for coming out to listen to Geronimo Villanueva talk. He's highly qualified. He has a wealth of experience, and he should be a great speaker today. So I'm excited to hear more about Mars and water on Mars. He's here as part of CU Cafe, which is a group of grad students and postdocs, we say underrepresented groups. We essentially wrote a grant and won money to bring in speakers. So Geronimo is part of that in addition to APS. There are other events that he'll be a part of. We also have another great speaker that will be speaking tomorrow, Hannah Kerner. She's a grad student at Arizona State University. She'll be speaking about planetary exploration, machine intelligence, and gender equality in Gilla X317 tomorrow from 11 a.m. to noon. So if you guys have some time, please come check it out. There's an email going around with the announcement. I have more flyers if you need it. So please come check it out and enjoy Geronimo's talk.
Thank you, Chris.
And as the last item, I'll say we have 3 more spots at the table for dinner at the kitchen. Please see me right away after today's presentation if you want to come. And it goes in the order of undergrads, grad students, postdocs, faculty for those places. So please let me know. Matteo, might you have already had that conversation with anybody? Not yet? Okay, so it's going to be free for all, but I really want those seats to go to join in front of them for dinner. Okay.
Thank you, Nick. Yes. Thank you, Nick. And it's a really privilege to be here, especially because of the MAVEN effort. And MAVEN is transforming our understanding of the planet. And I have to say, the thing is that a lot of the effort on Mars has been always on the surface, on geology. And it's good to see that we have an aeronomy mission. And it's also, I'm going to be talking about the atmosphere, so I'm biased in that comment. But it's good that we are going beyond the surface and exploring more beyond something the gaseous elements. So I'm a physics in background, but I'm astronomy and deep in heart. So my talk is going to be a lot about astronomical investigations of Mars. So I want to give a sense, probably you know some of these stories, but I think give you a sense why Mars has always been an important element in the investigation of our solar system. So this is Huygens, some of the pioneering astronomy being done. One of the first imaging, as you can see. They already see the features. They can see some morphologies. There was nothing unique. He actually say he can actually identify a lot of the structures on the planet. But one of the things I already saw, he already could see the polar cap, which is pretty cool. Huygens already in 1672 was able to see the polar cap. He didn't know it was a polar cap at the time. Herschel, almost 100 years later, he started to get more mapping, and then he started to become more meticulous about the observations. And even though his measurements were not really as revealing as anything you can think, he already started to become the analogy between Mars and Earth is perhaps by far the greatest in the solar system. And I think this idea has been percolating in history over hundreds of years, and that's why Mars has always been in the imagination of people beyond science also. So some of the most things that actually put more attention, as you know very well, this is the Schiaparelli, is an Italian astronomer. He was, I mean, even though there were many other astronomers who were doing mapping of Mars, I think he is the one who did a very comprehensive study, and he started to put labels to things on Mars. So it became like the standard for what we know about Mars. So one of the things that is being claimed, and is some truth there, so as an Italian, he was talking about canali. This is a way to define channels. Mainly he was thinking about water-driven structures. And obviously, Lowell, a little bit later, he was fascinated by the comments by Schiaparelli, and he wrote a big article about it and say, well, this channels actually maybe networks that are now, there's something, civilization. So this was 1885, and this was 100 years ago. It's not, I mean, even though we think, but it's not that long ago, people were thinking that there were networks of stuff going on the planet. So our imagination exploded with these things, and so Mars has always been an important element on civilization beyond our. Sorry? Yeah, he was putting numbers, and he thought there were like avenues connecting civilization. And then, I mean, as you can see from Hollywood, they love Lowell ideas of civilization. Still think there are civilizations living there. So, I mean, this was always in our imagination. So the science that came after this was to give a sense of reality to what's going on the planet. So what do we actually know about Mars? So I'm going to tell about a little bit of history about Mars, and then what we've been learning lately. So I always start with this to give a sense of context where we are. And actually, it's not a joke; it's relevant. So we had the Big Bang here. Actually, this should be 13.8 billion years. We go through the first stars. Stars get created and they die, and then we are here with the last expansion. So interesting about this plot is this thing. So as we always say, we're stardust. So in order for us to be here, all the heavy elements have to be formed, and it has to die. So you have the cycle of a star, and actually you need to create stars, and then they have to die. So in order to have a solar system rich in heavy elements like carbon, nitrogen, anything bigger than hydrogen actually, you need to have stars to create and to die. And if you're forming a solar system from here, from 4.6 billion years, we are actually in a lucky spot in the history of our universe. Not every solar system out there has been created in the right time with all these heavy elements. Some of them are too young, and they don't have the heavy elements in the right proportions. And some of them are too young than here. They don't still not been developed enough. So our planet is actually in a good time in the universe of the thing. So we've been created in the right time in that sense. And the thing also that goes beyond that is that, so 4.6 billion years, we have the solar system being created. We have the star already died, collapsed. We have these heavy elements, and now we have a cloud of material. And then we have this protosolar nebula. The key thing from this chart is that the closer you are to the protostar, the hotter it is, the further it gets colder. But the key thing about this is that there are temperatures here that you can see. You can go 300 Kelvin, 50 Kelvin, 2000 Kelvin. And there's like a magic line here, which is called the frost line, which is very important when you form a solar system. So if you are forming then planets around here, you will form planets here which are void and water here. Why? Because it's difficult to accumulate gas. I mean, if you have water ice, you can join it together with dust and make it like a little rubble pile. But it's difficult to do it here in the gas form. So actually the same with methane. So if you start forming planets, it's difficult to create planets rich in methane here, but it's easier to create them here. So this line is so dramatically important in our solar system that anything that was inside this line is small and rocky, and these are the rocky planets. Anything outside this line is rich in gases. So it's such a dramatic difference that this line, this artificial line here, frost line, that we have the gas giant and the icy giants all defined by this line, magic line, and then we have the rocky planets. The key thing about this chart is this. If you find water in Neptune and Uranus, it's great. but we know it's because it was given primordially. If you find a lot of methane in Pluto, fantastic, but we know it's primordial. But if you find water and methane in a rocky planet, they have a significance because they shouldn't be there. Or if it should be there, it should be in a small amounts. So the quest for habitability and the search for life outside our planet has been based on the rocky planets and in the search for these organic or trace species because they shouldn't be there from the formation process. So one of the hypotheses has been formed that how that water and organics actually were delivered, because we shouldn't have anything or a small one, is this. So these are we have Jupiter here. This is called the Nismol, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. We have the icy remnants here. And you can see time is evolving from the formation, 4.5 billion years, millions of years are passing. And you can see the big guys here, they start to go around between them and start to become resonant, gravitationally speaking. And there's a moment that these two guys, even though these are very far away from Jupiter and Saturn, they start to become very resonant, and then they start to become have an interplay in gravity, and then actually start to impact the whole solar system. Even though they are here, they start to impact everything. And then there's a moment that these actually Neptune and Uranus flip orbits, and this guy goes away, and then we have the actual configuration, and then we have all these icy bodies coming inside and coming out. So this process has been labeled the late heavy bombardment, or it's kind of the process that all these icy bodies, which are rich in water and organics, came inside the solar system and bombarded our planets, the terrestrial planets. And some of them came out and formed the Oort cloud of comets. It's an hypothesis. It's kind of based a lot on the lunar record, but it's kind of the prevailing hypothesis of how our configuration of the solar system is created. So the late heavy bombardment has been claimed as a way to deliver small water and organics to terrestrial planets, which should are normally devoid of these things. So the key thing is that if these things came to Earth and they are responsible for our oceans, there's been say, well, it may also went to Mars. So the key thing is that we call it, as an astrobiologist, the seeds of life maybe came to our planet for comets or small icy bodies, maybe also went to Mars. So on where we focus so much on Mars? Okay, so these are the 4 terrestrial planets, and we focus a lot on Mars because we are a terrestrial planet and we are very anthropocentric in our definition about what a life is about and what a planet habitable is. But it kind of makes some sense. You need to have here, this is too hot, this is too cold, and this is the habitable region in the solar system, in our solar system. Again, it's a little bit anthropocentric that we are the only habitable planet in our solar system, but it makes some sense. So this definition is based on the surface of the planet might maintain liquid water. So this will be too hot, where water is going to be in the vapor phase, especially Venus because of the greenhouse. And Mars is too cold on the surface to maintain liquid water. So Mars is not habitable. It's actually a non-habitable place. So why we care about Mars then? So a lot of the emphasis has been about ancient Mars, and also has been about Mars, but below the surface. So when we think about habitability on Mars, we're mainly thinking about below the surface, or in a very streamophile environment on the surface. But most of the search for life on Mars has been below the surface, where habitability will be there, pressures are higher, temperatures may be higher, and it will allow Mars to be habitable. So beyond our solar system, there's no more. You can go to the icy moons, you can get an ocean, but terrestrial planets like that we can have a planet like this, there are not a lot of those, and Mars is the only lucky guy. And that's why NASA and other agencies have paid so much attention to Mars, because it's the closest, as Huygens already say, to what we have our planet. But then you take a picture of the two, and they look pretty different, actually. So we are a planet full of life. You have plate tectonics driving these beautiful structures on the planet. We're covered by oceans. 70% of our planet is covered in oceans. We have rainforests. And then you look at Mars, it looks like a dead planet. It looks like a red moon. You have some ice there. So you say, what, habitability? It's difficult to comprehend habitability in a place like this. But I always make this comparison. We are still a terrestrial planet. Even though we are covering water, water is a trace amount. And even though we think water is prevalent, it drives everything, we are a rocky planet. And water is a small amount. This is all the surface water, oceans, rivers, everything. Even if you put the crust water, this bubble maybe become twice as big. But the amount of water is still a small amount compared to our rocky structure. And if you think about Mars, if you take out all the water from the polar caps, you will produce this little pebble here. Normally, when we quantify water on a planet, we use this quantity called GEL, which is global equivalent layer. It means that how deep would be an ocean if we be covering the whole planet and the planet would be in a sphere. So this would be 30 meters deep, and this would be 2,700 meters deep. So we have much more water. The question is, there was a lot of debate in history, was Mars like Earth? And maybe we both had the same conditions, or maybe we keep more water, maybe Mars didn't. It's kind of the questions. So the question is that the planets are different also in size, and that actually the history of the two is being defined by their sizes among other parameters. But our planet is bigger by a factor of 2, and I will tell a little bit more about the histories and how their sizes impact how that water behave over long times. So when we think about history of the two planets, I will give you a story about the two planets, how they were progressing over time since they were formed. We have Earth, and we have these 4 areas, and they're all defined by life and biology. Hadean, Archean, Proterozoic, and Paleozoic. The biologists love those names, they're complicated. And for Mars, for Mars, we obviously we kind of use biology. We base all in geology, and they are the 3 areas which are actually pretty well defined on Mars: the Noachian, the Hesperian, and the Amazonian. But the key thing is this: so in early Earth, well, actually, was a very non-habitable place. Mars was, had moderate geological activity. We had the heavy bombardment. The surface was very hot. It was not a good place to be. So if you want to look for habitability in a solar system, no, Earth was not the right place. But then the planet started to cool down and become an unorganized planet in some way. It developed plate tectonics that allowed circulation of material going back and forth, and that allowed mixing of all components. And it allowed the planet to have a kind of steady state of mixing on the crust. The other thing is that the planet started to become stable also atmospheric-wise, and it became a more habitable place. So this was a good time to be on our planet. Actually, it was such a good place that microbial life actually started around that time. We don't know exactly when, but we call this the Archean time, probably around 3.7 or 3.6. There's a lot of debate about it, but obviously it happened here. The key thing is that for a long time, actually the majority of our history, we had life that it was undetectable. I mean, even if you come and you land on our planet, you will not be able to detect that life because it was something like this. I mean, you definitely need to be a biologist to identify that as life. Actually, there were no traces of life in our atmosphere. Actually, our atmosphere was still an oxygen-poor atmosphere. We had a sulfur-rich oxygen. So the planet was not, if you were looking for life on our planet at that time, it wouldn't look it was looking habitable, but life was not evidently there. And obviously, our definition of life is being defined by the last stages of this, which is the multicellular life, especially the last part of the arrow, which is based on the complexity of life as we know it, plants, animals, and human beings. But the key thing is when you're looking for life beyond our planet, we have to base on that the most probable thing is to looking for very simple microbial unicellular life. And that's what we had for a long time. So if you want to look for life beyond our planet, we should concentrate on that. And that's a tough choice because it's very difficult to look for that type of life because, as you say, signatures are not so well clear. So that's why the search for life beyond our planet has been so difficult. But you can see that our planet went through a lot of history. This time was the good time for Earth. So what about Mars? So Mars actually, when it started, was a good planet. It was a very nice planet. It was hot internally. It was very habitable. We have evidence of a lot of flows of water, bodies of water there a long time. This actually this is the Noachian time. The beginning of the Noachian was actually a very habitable place. So if you were life at that time, you wouldn't want to be on Earth. You want to be on Mars. And the planet was unfortunately kind of changing with time. Volcanic activity has to have the global climate change. The atmosphere was changing a lot. We started to get this acidic environment, and then the planet started to die, geologically speaking. And when a planet started to die, it had these convulsions, I would say, geological convulsions, and produced Olympus Mons. But they were not organized in our planet. It never developed plate tectonics in a fashionable way. So the planet was, kind of the remnants of the planet that was dying, geologically speaking. And as I was telling you, for Earth was great because we had a very organized circulation, transport of material. And as we know, for life, it's great that we can mix stuff. But our planet, this planet was dying, and it was, we think even some people say that, some people even say that Mars looks like this right now. So most of the people actually think it's this way. But we were supposed to be sending a mission called InSight that unfortunately got delayed by 2 years. But the key thing is to understand if this Mars is more like this or like this. The key thing is that the planet died, geologically speaking. That's why it looks like the way we see it. It's a kind of a dead rock, a red rock from all its history. The good thing about it is that it never developed plate tectonics. That means that the record on the surface of Mars can tell you about 4.5 billion years. That is impossible to do it on Earth. So the good thing is that you can go to a surface feature and you can go back in time. And if you have life ever arose or anything, the record should be there, actually pretty accessible, below a couple of centimeters below the surface, because some of those things were there, and if they were maybe preserved for a long time. So some of the questions that we're trying to answer is, was Mars ever habitable? How much water did Mars actually have? And if there is any evidence that something below the surface is still lurking there. So just to tell you, we didn't know very much Mars was more like this or more like this. So we still a lot of questions. And MAVEN, one of the main questions has been to understand if the conditions were like this or more like this. So I'm gonna tell a bit about how we do complement the MAVEN measurements to try to answer these questions. So the first thing is to understand if there's something going on right now. So I was telling you that maybe something is still there, geology, maybe some remnant biology also. So we're looking for chemical imbalances. You can use the atmosphere as a way to look for that. So you can produce meteoritic dust will produce a chemical imbalance. You can have a comet impact, almost is something that happened a couple of years ago, and MAVEN knows that very well. And then you can have some scarf phases, and you have some methane, some gas there. And below the surface, you have a process called serpentinization, which is a very effective way to produce methane. Serpentine, water, and very moderate temperatures, you produce methane. That will be a geological process. And obviously, the interesting thing, the possibility is that below the surface, below the same scarf phase, you can have an aquifer and maybe some simple bacteria or archaea producing methane. So the key thing is this: you can investigate for current activity by looking for things that should not be there. So total methane should not be there because it's not primordial. If you find methane on Mars, it shouldn't be there. And it's considered a chemical imbalance, and some people call it a biomarker, as if you consider life. And our planet, methane is being mainly produced by life. That's why it's called a biomarker. So when we think about life, we're not thinking about cows, even though they're conveniently called them. But you can have radioactive material. You break the bonds of water. You produce hydrogen. We call it free food. Some simple bacteria or archaea will eat that, and together with the CO2 will produce methane. So it's a very simple living organism. Actually, biologists, when they think about life beyond, they're looking at these very simple processes. The key thing, this is the exothermic process. It breaks the bonds. This is hydrogen is like free food for typical any type of life. And this simple process could be lurking below the surface of Mars. So when we're looking for life beyond beyond our planet and going to Mars, we're looking for some process like this. But where do we think such a thing will be happening? So the upper atmosphere is a tough place. We call that a photic zone. The few upper centimeters are heavily radiated. They break anything, any structure of information, protein, it will be broken. So not a place you want to be. If you are here, this is a sublimation zone. You have still some ice, and then you have to go kind of deep. There's different models. People talk about kilometers, some people talk meters. But typically you have to go deep to find the water in the liquid form that will allow it to be habitable. So the problem is that you need to, it's difficult to penetrate this into the planet. I mean, how are you going to drill 2 kilometers deep to look for life? So since this is the model dependent, there are some hopes that maybe these aquifers may be actually up there. And if you have some salts and brines and stuff, you can move this layer more up in up to meters range. So the Ryan hypothesis is that you can have hydrothermal activity deep in the below the surface, biology, and even some primordial methane stored in clathrates, and some aquifer, and then you have some sort of protection process. And then you can have a seasonal effect that is open in summer and then closed in winter, and you can produce a release of methane. So this has been the hypothesis to explain some of the measurements of methane on Mars. And just to tell you, the good thing about methane that it should not be there is because that gets destroyed pretty quickly. So methane gets above 60 kilometers, gets photolyzed into something else, methyl, and then it goes into a different path. It means that methane, it gets destroyed pretty quickly. If you go to lower atmosphere, you're going to get oxidized into formaldehyde and other things. And even in the lower atmosphere, electrochemistry with peroxide will destroy methane. So it's a molecule that is telling you about something below the surface, and it gets destroyed pretty quickly. It lasts, let's say, 300 years. So it's a molecule that is a good tracer of current activity. That's why if you see it, it's very remarkable because it should not be there. So you can look for water, methane, and all these other guys. So, and I had to say, I spent my last 10 years of my, or even 12 years of my life, looking for all these molecules on Mars. And these are tough molecules to be searching for because they are in a very trace amounts. We're looking for parts per billion. You know, for every billion of the atmosphere, one of them may be one of these molecules. So these are tough molecules to search for. So what we did is we use some telescopes. We look at the lines in absorption. These are the methane lines, these are the water lines. The problem is that you're looking at this, if you're looking for a ground-based telescope, you're looking for the same atmosphere that we are, plenty of life. So you're looking for life on Mars, you're going to see through in the life on our planet. So this makes the measurement is extremely complicated. You will never know, it gets very complicated. So we wait for Mars to move away from us or come to us at the Doppler shift to separate these lines, the rest of the lines from the methane lines. And we use 3 telescopes. So I always make this joke. I had 1 million spectra from these 3 telescopes. I collected it over 6 years. And then I went to the iPipeline. I actually went to the Apple store to see if it was there, and it was not there. And then voila, you get the papers out. But I couldn't find it. So I've been working to develop these tools to process the data. So what I've been working in my last 10 years is trying to develop all these tools. You need the solar spectrum, CO2 database, ethane database, terrestrial model, water databases, methanol databases, fractionation models for the spectroscopically speaking, and then all these other databases. So it took me 10 years to get all these things. But once we got all this stuff and we were, had the tools to it, we actually went back to the data, processed the data, and then we saw this. So we saw a methane plume and water plumes, and they are non-correlated. Some of them correlate, some of them not. Actually, the water structure is pretty well known. Was not surprising, but this was surprising. If methane was there, it should be well mixed. It should not look in plumes, and it should be everywhere. And actually, it shouldn't be at all there. The fact that we were seeing it was very, very strange. So it took me 5 years to validate. This data was taken in 2003. We published in 2009. So it took us 6 years to make sure that these numbers are as reliable as possible. But the measurements are parts per billion, so these are tough measurements. So the paper came out, and then actually other teams also were reporting methane. So some on ground-based, some on space. So a lot of people were talking about methane on Mars, and people were saying, well, it's difficult to explain physically why it's there, and the measurements are tricky, so we don't know. But what happened is in 2015, TLS, which is it's an instrument on the Curiosity, reported the detections of methane on Mars. And they say plumes of about 10 ppb around a base value of 1 ppb, small amounts. And this kind of settled the story, but obviously there were a lot of papers about saying, no, this cannot be right. Actually, when this paper came out, this is played again. Some came out in Nature saying, we don't believe it. And I have to say, so it has become a very, in the community, in the Martian community, has been very, very aggressive thing with the believers and the non-believers. But I would tell you, as a scientist, as not a person who thinks that we had to define this as a belief or not, this search for methane is very convoluted. And I have to say, I thought that Curiosity was going to be the nail in the coffin on this, but I don't think the measurements are reliable enough. They have a lot of systematic problems. Our measurements are extremely complicated, and we have a lot of degree for error there. So I'm not even confident that our measurements are right. So I think the debate is there because it has to be there, and it has to continue to be there. And I think if somebody comes and tell you it's there, don't believe it, and someone tell you it's not there, don't believe it either. Just we don't know, we don't have the evidence yet to know what's going on. So actually, I spent 6 years taking data, and I looked for methane and other things, and I only got 7 parts per billion upper limits. I didn't detect it. So the key thing is I always make jokes. So this paper, I spent 6 years going to telescopes, and I was going all the time. And my wife got bored because I was never at home. So fortunately, well, she replaced me with a hamster. So I was not very happy that I was replaced by a hamster, but it's okay. But okay, and it was all for upper limits. It was pretty frustrating, but it's okay. So the key thing is that we don't know if Mars is active, and the key debates about Mars being an active planet is very controversial. And we have a mission that just got launched called ExoMars. The sole purpose is look for methane and other things to get the right numbers. So the key thing is that I think we're going to know more about it, and I think soon we're going to know more if methane is actually there or not. So the question that what MAVEN is to see if, and also what I'm going to be talking also about today, is it was habitable or not at all. So the trick is in the D/H. That's one of the goals of the MAVEN. So you have the hydrogen. This is oxygen, deuterium, and oxygen. You break the bonds, and you have the atomic components, the deuterium and hydrogen. So here in red is going to be the hydrogen, and in more bluish is going to be the deuterium. So in some sense, the deuterium cannot be escaping less effectively than the hydrogen. And if you leave that running for a long time, actually the difference between escape is small. But if you leave that running for a long time, you will tend to enrich the atmosphere in the heavy form, in the deuterium form. And if you go, you can use that as a metric to see how much water will escape. And this is one of the goals of MAVEN, but looking at the escape rates in the upper atmosphere. So the good thing is that we have some new measurements done with meteoritic stuff. There were some debates. Finally, we have good numbers for a meteoritic record. This is a rock which is 4.5 billion years. A rock that came from Mars. It's in our planet. We can make the measurements, and this is it measures the D/H, which is around 1.275 BSMO. BSMO is a terrestrial value, it's a value in the ocean. Just if you see that number again, it's the ocean value. It means that this value is pretty much the same as the oceans, our oceans, which is pretty cool, actually, that the primordial water on Mars is practically the same as the primordial water. Well, the primordial water on Mars is practically the same as our oceans. That it may imply that we have a common origin for the water. Interestingly, so Curiosity made a measurement at the Gale crater, and it used a proper rock which was 3 billion years old, so 1.5 billion years later, and it's already enriching a factor of 3 terrestrial. So you can see Mars was losing a lot of water, was enhancing the deuterium, and it was going very high. Just to remember, our D/H, we tend to think that it was being preserved for a long time. So we think that this 1 BSMO has been our number for a long time. The fact that Mars has went to 3 such a quickly step is pretty interesting. The key thing is that we don't know what the true number is. I mean, even though we should know pretty well what is the number in our own in the Martian atmosphere, it was not truly known. So the good thing is that while I was doing the methane measurements, at the same time I was doing the D/H measurements. So I got an upper limit, but I also got the D/H numbers, which was a good thing. So it's the same telescopes. And just to give you a sense of the data, the good thing about the D/H is that the lines are booming. So it's no debate that the lines are there. And you can see this is the heavy water lines on Mars. These are the Martian lines. You can see they're huge. And you can also measure CO2, which is great because you can use the mixing ratio. CO2 is the main constituent of the Martian atmosphere. And we can also measure water on Mars. And these are these lines here, and this is the CO2. So again, we have abundance ratio of water to CO2 and H2O to CO2. And so these lines are so bright that we can actually do maps. And so we start doing some tricks with the instrument, trying to get mapping techniques. And we develop a new strategy to map this value of Mars. And we got these maps. And so this is the first time we got the maps. The maps, I mean, if you do a little bit of Mars climatology, they don't look very surprising in the sense that this is northern summer of Mars. The polar caps are subliming, releasing water. You have a lot of water coming from the poles and slowly move to the equatorial areas. So this is not very, outstanding, we can say. This is Elizabeth 80, so northern late spring of Mars. But the key thing was the ratio between the two, the H2O to the H2O. Look at the numbers. This is parts per billion, and this is parts per million. So obviously this is a trace amount relative to this. But the key thing was the ratio of the two. And I have to say, again, when I did the first time the ratio, I was expecting I'm going to get a common number, like, whatever, 7 or 6, 5. And we're talking about a number that is supposed to be 4.5 billion years old, so it should be pretty steady, that it kept steady for a long time. So when I make the map, and I say, oh my God, this value goes from 1 to 10. And it's like, oh my God, all my retrievers are wrong. And I spend on this, it's going to be right. And I check everywhere, and it's like, yeah, it's probably right. So the D over H is changing like crazy on the planet. And I was pretty surprised, so I was very skeptical, and I keep checking. And then I realized that maybe there is a meaning to this. And I would explain that actually there is a meaning for this. So the value is telling you that there are two components here, the escape of hydrogen and deuterium over long times, and some sort of something that happens over very short time scales. Just to give you a sense, this is like a little mound here, or a crater, and this is changing within hours. So this is like, it cannot be isotopic fractionation process. It has to be something else going on the planet. It cannot be escape rates. It has to be something very fast, within hours. So the one good thing is that the Curiosity went a measurement around there, and our number matched pretty well to the Curiosity number. And so we felt confident that our column number that goes from 0 to the surface up to 1 kilometers, we were measuring the right amount of water and the amount of D over H. But the D over H was very different across the planet. And I'll tell you the truth. I mean, this is very interesting that this is Keck in Hawaii. This is Cryos in Bill. These are very different instruments taking similar times. And you can see how the D over H actually overlaps. So that was a very good also validation that I think we were seeing something that was real on the planet. So just so you remember, the greenish color here is around 7. So the quick interpretation what these all mean is this. So if you make a cut here, this will be latitude. We have the polar layer deposit, the polar caps. You have these beautiful radar maps. You can see the very layers of water and on Mars. And then you have the equator, you have the winter hemisphere, and you have some subsurface water reservoirs. So the key thing is that we're talking about late spring, so water is coming from the polar caps, mainly the upper little thing. All these things are steady there. They've been there for maybe 5 million years. So I'm just talking about the seasonal water, which is in the upper part. It's like a little crust of water. And that water gets fully vaporized, and it gives you a number which is around 7, which is this greenish color across the planet. And then when you go here to the winter hemisphere, the numbers start to go down. And what is happening is that it starts to like condense or kind of snow down. It's kind of raining water. It's kind of condensing there. So what happens is that you're seeing a low water, the over H, just because climatology is happening then. And all those clouds, all those numbers that we're changing across the planet, we think that these are produced by fractionation. And it will explain some of the low numbers. It will not explain the high numbers. So we don't know really well how this process is. But the key thing is that we think this number here, the 7, is the true number of the atmosphere. People before were taking the average of this, and we're getting a lower number. The mean value was lower. By separating climatology with the map from evolution, we do know that the true isotopic ratio of the atmosphere is 7. And this is what we managed to do with the paper, is separate climatology from evolution in some way. So once you know the gas phase, you can infer what will be the D over H in the polar caps. And the good thing about the polar caps is that we know these polar caps are not very old. We know they are, relative to 4.5 billion years, they are millions of years old because of the obliquity change of the planet. So the planet has been, the one polar cap was vaporizing and then condensing again, vaporizing, condensing again within millions of years. That means that this polar cap has gone, the D over H stored here is all kind of mixed up. And it's kind of relative, representation of the atmospheric value. So if you go from the gas phase to the ice phase, it will be a value that the value is, using the model, you get a value of around 8 for the terrestrial. So how do you use that number? So you can then do investigate this is with time. And this is a very, rough way to do it, but it's kind of the main idea why the D over H is a relevant number. So here you have the water, and this is time, and this is when Mars was formed and to present here. We have the 8 and the atmospheric value, and then you have this massive fractionation by climatology. Then you can put here the Yamamoto number, the thing, and then you can magically put a line there. And this is what MAVEN is trying to do, is trying to give us what is a true trajectory here and actually complement all these things. But the moment we don't know how to join these 2 points. So, I can start pulling more other points, and this is the crater here, and some other values from other meteorites. And again, we don't know how to join them. So I just did put a simple little line, and I put this, you can put anything. You can draw a cartoon here, but okay. But just assume that this is the right path of the progression. The key thing is that water was being lost. And the beautiful thing about the isotopic ratios is a good tracer of what the escape process happened. And MAVEN is trying to know the true number for the escape rate. So one of the things you can do using this red trace is to know how much water was in the past. That's what the value of the D over H. So look at the scales now. They are going to be the same number, but they change. So now you have the water reservoir relative to the present. And then it's a very simple formula based on fractionation rate between the two. And you get this blue thing here, which is just a formula relationship from the red trace. And this will be 1. And then you go back in time, and then the water in the past was 6.5 times the value, which is right now. It means that Mars lost 87% of its water. The good thing about this measurement is that we know very much how much water the planet has. We actually have a pretty reliable number for the current number. So this is going to give you a number. The key thing about this is, I would say, is a lower bound of the amount of water escape, because I'm assuming that the escape process is a single escape process, but as we know very well, escape processes are multiple ones. So maybe the escape was more dramatic than I'm assuming. So whatever the number I'm getting here is a lower bound. Maybe there was much more water on Mars. But even with this amount of water, it was a lot of water. So if you get all the water in the polar caps, and it's around 30 meters, and then you multiply by 6.5, and you melt it, and you put it on the planet, it will produce a big ocean on the planet. And this ocean is it's around 20 to 30%. Interestingly, when the first time I did the calculation, and I created the ocean to see where it falls, it was matching geomorphology. People were before looking at crater countings and riverbeds and some of the ocean stuff, and it matched pretty nicely. So I was pretty happy that you can match D over H with geomorphology. The thing is that ocean was being escaping over time, and the planet was getting dry over time. The big question is, was Mars, so the big, the community is like, was Mars wet and hot? It means that water was in the ocean form, or that water was only tracing in ocean. The ocean was, only maybe for 100 years active. So this is one of the questions we're trying to answer, and maybe we'll try to answer that question. So the key thing that, for you to remember, that Mars had a lot of water, and there's no doubt about it. And this is kind of a lower band of how much water. And this is a pretty big ocean, 20%, 1 kilometer deep. This is a pretty significant ocean. So I think the planet was habitable in the past. So just to give you a sense, this is a pretty considerable ocean on the planet. So what are the next steps? So you can have these three things, these three assets you can use. We have orbiters, rovers, and you can use ground-based observatories. So if you're looking for complex organics, maybe fatty acids or DNA, RNA, you have to go with these guys, with rovers and landers, because the signatures, spectroscopically speaking, they don't allow remote sensing. So you need to go with something in situ. If you have an orbiter, you can put very specific instruments looking for particular molecules and stuff that allows to do very focused instrumentation. And these guys can do a lot of work, but high spectral resolution multi-wavelength. So these are very powerful from instrumental point of view. But these have modest spatial resolutions. This will allow you to do the mapping that you want. So I'm normally being happy with orbiters because allow you to do a lot of mapping, and you get very good instruments. And this gives you localized measurements. So each of them has different pros and cons. So it depends what you're looking for. So this one you can do occultation and native view, and you can do this one you cannot do a lot of vertical sounding, and this one you can do column and vertical retrievals. So this one you have limited expendables. These are typically short missions, and this one you can do long baseline. So each of these techniques allow you to do this. And I think by combining some of the work I've been working with ALMA, RTF, and Keck with MAVEN assets and ExoMars, and some of the rovers, we try to get a comprehensive picture and allow you to get an idea. And I have to say, this is the first time that we have that assets that are truly complementary, because having an atmospheric mission like ExoMars TGO and having an aeronomy mission like MAVEN, it's going to be the first time we can actually complement with the landers and the observatories here. So what is the future of exploration? So ALMA is a massive array of telescopes. It's a pretty remarkable observatory, which is in Chile. We just did observations on Mars and we managed to get the vertical structure of the overage on Mars. Well, we got the data. We don't know. I still didn't see it, but we just got, like 1 week ago, we finished to get the data, and it's going to be the first time we can actually map the vertical structure of the overage from 0 to 1 kilometers. In the future, we're going to get all these instruments. They're going to be comprehensive of trace species, but I will tell you the truth, these are more incremental steps. They are not really fundamental new science we'll be able to do. They're good, but kind of continuation of what is being done. And I think then in the future we have these big guys, the ELTs, or called extremely large telescopes, and those are this is in TMT, which is a 30-meter telescope in Hawaii. Now controversial because of the Native Americans don't want to have this telescope on the mountain. And this one is the ELT, which is an extremely large telescope. This is in Chile, and they will become operational between 2020 and 2024. And these guys are going to completely open new opportunities. They are heavily driven by astrophysics, so it's difficult to get a bit of planetary science there. But I think this is going to be a new frontiers in space planetary exploration. So what about Mars? So we got the launch, and I was afraid about the launch, but the Russians are, they told us you're going to launch at Monday at 5:12 p.m. like they told us 1 year ago, and it happened at that time. The rocket came out. It's remarkable. But it flew and it came out right, and actually all the process is going in order. We're going to take some data now of Earth. Then we have the Mars 2018 ExoMars. This is the one that had a drill. It will drill 2 meters deep, and James Webb, and then the Mars 2020. So actually ExoMars is actually a pretty nice mission. NASA was involved. That's why I'm involved. And then NASA, because of the crisis, pulled out. And fortunately, I was survived as a co-I to the instrument because the PI was from Belgium, but the PI from the U.S. left. So the Russians fill the place of the NASA. The good thing is that this mission is very important because it's called a trace case orbiter. It has a ADM model that will land on Mars in October this year. It's mainly to make sure that the Beagle axiom, the Europeans sent something to land on Mars last time, and it didn't successfully land there. So it's more to test that. And then the ExoMars 2018, which are unofficially been delayed to 2020 already, and it will drill 2 meters. And this is going to be one of the first time we can actually drill on the planet. But I think ExoMars, all the conundrums about the overage, I'm afraid of the overage, and method on Mars, I think this will be an amazing mission for that. And I'm involved also in the James Webb Telescope. And again, this is we call it an astrophysical asset. It's mainly for astrophysics. But it's a huge telescope at L2 Lagrange point. It's great because you can look at Mars, you have this big telescope, and you get the planet rotate in front of you. You can do very nice mapping, and you don't have the atmosphere to worry. So you can do a lot of organics. You can do the overage. So I think James Webb will be, incidentally, will become a good asset for Mars exploration. So the conclusions. So I think modern spectroscopy, I'm biased here, but have permitted unique advances in our understanding of Mars. So now we know a lot about the atmosphere, the past, the present, and we're looking for current activity. I think the search for current and ancient organics is still on. We know they're on the surface, but not on the atmosphere. But I think TGO will be key in solving some of these mysteries. And I think further mapping, and I think that's one of the hopes we can do for ExoMars and also ground-based, looking for these overage anomalies and some organic anomalies, we may be able to identify some subsurface habitable niches on the planet. So that's all. Thanks.
And thanks for leaving us time for some questions. So let's open the floor. Who's got questions for Geronimo?
Bruce.
Geronimo, there's been a lot of controversy over the methane measurements.
Yes.
And there are people who can make a case that none of the detections have actually detected Martian methane.
Yes.
And I'm not going to ask you to weigh in on that, but let me ask you a different question, and that is, do you think the trace gas orbiter will provide definitive measurements, or will they be just as controversial?
So I can tell you my idea about what I think about Mars methane. So the searches, previous searches. So the two orbiters on Mars that did Mars Express and on the MGS make the measurements of methane. They are very on the limit of the instrument. So I don't think they're reliable. Even their own teams are going back there. So I don't think those measurements are, they're out of the picture. We can say they're not valid. Then you have the other two, which are kind of staying a little bit longer, is the ground-based, the methane, the I'm involved, and the TLS. Our measurements are extremely complicated. And I have to say, we did all the best to get rid of the signal. It's still there. But I know the complexity of the observation is so big that, it's room for error. So, it's probably could be wrong. So I think we have to be frank about that. And I think the TLS, I was hoping that would be like, say, well, we know it. But the measurements I don't like the measurement. Actually, I don't like the measurement technique they have, because the measurement is like, they have the same problem as we have. It's a difference of two big numbers. So you measure 100 ppb of methane, and they close the thing and say, this is the background. They always have methane in the chamber. It's local, they brought from they brought from Earth. And they have that methane, and they measure 100 ppb. And then they open the thing, get some methane from the air, and they measure 100.5 methane. Make a difference and say, we got 0.5. And the error of every measurement is 30 ppb. But they bin the error, they bin a lot of numbers, and assuming that the noise goes beautifully down, as we know that's not true, and then it will become in the sensitivity to 0.5 ppb. So TLS, which I thought is going to be the ground truth, has become a convoluted number. So my impression, if you ask me, I don't think the numbers right now, any one of them are definitive. So we don't know yet. So what about ExoMars? And I was hoping that the controversy about methane is because it changes all the time. So the best way to kill all the skeptical is to make a map, a lot of maps, high sensitivity maps, and if you don't see it for 1 year, you have to say it's not there. So the only way you can do that is with the nadir channel. You need to have a nadir mapping all the time. And TGO, that was my main objective of TGO. Unfortunately, the Russians didn't want us to put a radiator, so we lost almost all the sensitivity on the nadir channel. So the mapping stuff is almost kind of gone. Sensitivity is not going to be great, and we will see how much we can do there. So all the measures of TGO are going to be in occultation or limb sounding, which is good, but it leaves room for, hey, you didn't see it because you were not looking at the right place at the right time. So it's still there, but unfortunately, I don't know if it's going to get solved. Hopefully it will, but I don't know. Yeah.
You might say a minute about the Indian attempt to measure methane.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. So, last 3 weeks ago, we went, Alex and Nick, other people from MAVEN team and other people, we went to India to work with the Indians because they have a mission now on Mars called MOM. And one of the instruments is actually called a methane mapper. So the main purpose is to look for methane. So one of the things I was tasked to do is investigate the sensitivity of the instrument to see what can they do. So I spent a lot of time trying to investigate, what they can actually do. And unfortunately, they cannot do much. It's an instrument that I think demonstrates Indian, space. It's fantastic. They managed to put a thing on Mars, and it shows great, progress. But from a science point of view, I don't think they're going to be able to identify anything about methane on Mars, unfortunately.
It's a tough problem. Any non-methane questions? Sorry, Axel, if you have a methane question, you're a non-methane person. You can ask.
I'm not a methane person, but I'm interested in carbon-13.
Yes. Yes.
On Earth, carbon-13 is one of the most powerful biomarkers.
Correct.
As far as the
Yes.
very ancient life is concerned. Is there any hope that one can measure carbon-13 on Mars?
Yeah.
And actually, I would like to come to methane because on Earth, of course, there's also a lot of methane sources, some of which are not necessarily biological.
Correct.
Can one see any carbon-13 fractionation between those?
Yeah. So
one has either organic or non-organic.
this is a big question. So methane is being considered biomarker because 90% is being produced by life, but it's a big chunk of methane is being produced geologically, by geology. So the good thing about life that they likes the light form of methane, the carbon-12. So if you see a source of methane which will enrich in the light form of methane and the carbon, then you tend to think it's a biological. So people use that as a biomarker. Low methane, light methane is a biomarker. The problem is that in order to make that measurement, you need to do two things. You need to make incredible sensitivities to measure methane and the isotope, which is already pretty difficult. And there are no instrument that can do it. Even ExoMars cannot make isotopic ratios at that sensitivity, because these are very small changes in isotopic ratio. So there's no possibility. And the other second problem is that you need to know the reservoir of carbon-13 and carbon-12 where the methane is being produced. So, because it's a differential effect. So life eats, something, and it tends to produce some light form. So you need to know the reservoir of methane and have the incredible precision. Those two things restricts the search for in that way to look for life on Mars. So I think our only hope is to look for, if you're looking for methane, for life biomarkers, I think is to look for, ethane and propane, chains. Life also doesn't like the heavy chains and tend to concentrate on methane. So geology tend to produce all of them at the same time in similar abundances. So by looking at the ethane to methane to propane ratio, you can get an idea about biology, geology. So I think if you ask me if we are confident that we're seeing things, I think that would be an easier metric to distinguish geology from biology.
Any more questions? Dave.
I have a question about E to H instead of
Yes.
methane. Your red connect the dots
Yes.
curve was pretty sparsely populated, and you made a joke about that. How do you populate that more? Do you need lots of surface rocks of different ages basically to fill in the gaps?
Yeah, that's
Is there a less expensive way?
No, it's a very good point. So how do we propagate that? Because it helps everybody. MAVEN, everybody to construct models and take data. So even the curiosity number, which is 3 billion years old, there's no error bar in the time. And we don't know very well. We think it's 3 billion years. A great curve, the morphology indicates it's 3 billion years old. Even that number don't know very well. So if you ask me what would be the easiest way is to send a lot of small little probes and then you go for different areas on the surface of Mars, make measurements, and you fill that gap. This is an expensive way to do it. Getting rocks from Earth at different ages, there's a lot of rocks. Some of them are the cluster to very young to be very old. We don't have a lot of. We don't really fill that very well. So it's going to be challenging to fill more that gap, I'd say. But I don't know. Maybe somebody comes with a smart idea. But that's kind of the limitations of that. Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned that the ExoMars 2018 drilling would be
Yeah.
inclusive, but isn't that subject to heavy bias to where you choose to drill down?
I completely agree. So as I was always joked, when I started my PhD, I was involved with the ExoMars when they were planning the mission, and they were planning to drill 20 meters, and that was 15 years ago. And every year I would go to STEC to talk about the progress of the mission. It was getting 1 meter shorter. And that was 2 years. I always make fun. It was 2 years ago, and it was 2 meters. So hopefully, it's still the drilling. Yeah. It may actually go up. Yeah, I don't know. Telescopic stuff. So yeah, even 2 meters is it good enough? And I agree. So it depends a lot where you're going to make where you land the thing. So there's a lot of planning ahead. Where you're going to make the measurement? How difficult it's going to be to drill over there? If it's it's going to be difficult also to plan that. And that's why I think it has been delayed. So we're supposed to be 2018, and I think it's gone to 2020 because the mission is becoming so complex in every dimension that I don't know. Hopefully it goes more.
But that's 4 years.
I know.
How many meters? That's.
I know. So I'll say I hope that it lands and it make a drill. So it will be the first time we actually make a good drill. Actually, at the Mars 2020 mission, they want to do. So they're going to drill and they will capture samples, but mainly for future collection. They will not do any measurement on them. So unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay. Any last questions?
Yeah.
Couple more.
I never had a chance to put your DDH knob side by side with the Denver
So that's a really good point. So just to give a sense for everybody, so there is an instrument that measures neutrons on Mars, and mainly it's looking for hydrogen. And this is a thing that measures mainly the first meter of the surface of the planet, looking for hydrogen. And they had a map that you can see these very localized areas. The problem, we don't know how the hydrogen is locked in the surface, on the planet, on the thing. Could be hydrogen minerals, or we don't know how the hydrogen is. We don't know if it's water, or what is that hydrogen. We know it's hydrogen, but we don't know where it was. So one of the things I learned from my maps, if you ask me right now, I think the only thing I can tell you for sure that this is dichotomy with latitude. That it's pretty clear that you see this low leverage in the winter, and then it goes pretty high in the summertime. All the longitude variability that I saw, I think it's all climatology. So what I'm working on right now is with people who's developing climatological models of Mars, to see how much of that structure is climatology, clouds and stuff, and how much of that is actually none. And that's why also I did these measurements of ALMA, trying to get the vertical, because I was allowed to know, if that leverage comes from the surface, or it's more like it gets fractionated in the upper in the mid atmosphere. So at the moment, I would be feeling confident, not very confident, to relate that to anything on the surface of Mars.
Let's see one last. This time,
Building off of the question from over there about filling in those gaps for G to H, I noticed that you have a few meteorites for the older ones, older measurements, but would you also be able to use some of the younger meteorites, sugartites, naphthenites,
Correct.
to fill in?
Correct. So for example, I was at LPSC, and they were presenting some of the new